Football has a cruel way of writing its most definitive stories. It plays with symmetries, with cosmic ironies that seem too perfect to be real, leaving us to wonder if the fates of the greatest players are predetermined from the very moment they lace up their boots. In the summer of 2026, underneath the towering steel and the blinding lights of MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, the story of a generation came to a grinding, agonizing halt. The scoreboard read Norway 2, Brazil 1. The final whistle sounded like a gunshot to the chest of over 200 million people. As the towering figure of Erling Haaland celebrated wildly with his teammates, jumping into the cool American night air, another man, wearing the iconic yellow number 10, slowly sank to his knees. Neymar Jr. rested his forehead against the manicured grass of the pitch, his shoulders shaking as the reality of the moment washed over him. The dream was dead. The long, exhausting, beautiful, and chaotic chase for the sixth World Cup star had reached its final stop. Hours later, standing in front of a wall of flashing cameras and a sea of microphonic black foam, an emotionally drained Neymar delivered the words that everyone feared but knew were coming. I tried. Now it is over. My body hurts, my head hurts. I started here and I closed it here. It was a statement that sent shockwaves through London, Madrid, Paris, Tokyo, and every single corner of Brazil. He was done. At 34 years old, the last true samba magician of his era was walking away from the Seleção forever. But to truly understand why this specific defeat at MetLife Stadium felt like a knife twisted into an old wound, you have to rewind the clock 16 years. You have to go back to August 2010. A fresh-faced, skinny 18-year-old kid with a wild mohawk and an infectious smile walked out onto that exact same patch of grass in New Jersey. It was his international debut against the United States. Within 28 minutes, he met a cross from Andre Santos and guided a delicate header into the back of the net. That night, a legendary journey was born in East Rutherford. 16 years later, that same journey was buried in East Rutherford. The promised land had turned into a cemetery of dreams. This video is not just an analysis of a single tournament or a tactical breakdown of why Carlo Ancelotti could not break down a stubborn Scandinavian defense. This is an archival exploration of the most captivating, polarizing, and dramatic international career in modern football history. From the absolute ecstasy of his early days to the shattering spine injury in Fortaleza, from the tears of Kazan to the heartbreak of Lusail, we are going to unpack the full, unedited story of Neymar's international life. Before we look at how the empire crumbled in 2026, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments below. Do you think Neymar is the most misunderstood genius in the history of Brazilian football, or did he simply fail to live up to the standard of Pelé, Ronaldo, and Ronaldinho? Let me know where you are watching this from, because this ride is going to be emotional. Let us look back at the beginning of the weight he carried. The burden of being chosen as the savior of football in a land that treats the sport as a literal religion is a weight very few human beings can comprehend. For Neymar, this pressure was not applied gradually. It was dumped onto his shoulders when he was still just a teenager tearing things up for Santos in Vila Belmiro. Imagine the context of Brazilian football back then. The magic of the 2002 World Cup winning squad was fading rapidly into the history books. Ronaldinho Gaucho was losing his spark, Kaká was battling chronic knee issues, and the famous Joga Bonito identity was being replaced by a more mechanical, Europeanized style of play. Brazil was desperate for a new icon, a new hero who could dance with the ball, humiliate defenders with a single flick of the ankle, and restore pride to the yellow jersey. Neymar was that chosen boy. When Dunga refused to take him to the 2010 World Cup in South Africa despite massive public outcry, it only amplified the myth. By the time Mano Menezes handed him the starting shirt against the Americans in New Jersey, everyone believed they were witnessing the dawn of a new king. And for a long time, Neymar played like one. Every touch was an exhibition, every dribble was a statement of defiance against modern tactical rigidity. He gave the people hope that the beautiful game could still be played with joy and irreverence. But with that immense love came an equal amount of scrutiny. Every single aspect of his life became public property. His haircuts, his parties, his lifestyle, his relationship choices, everything was analyzed under a microscope by media pundits and fans alike. If Brazil won, he was the genius. If Brazil lost, he was the reason for the failure. The line between appreciation and resentment became incredibly thin. As the years progressed, he began racking up goals at an unprecedented rate, hunting down records that belonged to absolute immortals of the sport. Yet, the question always lingered in the background. Can he win the big one? Can he deliver the trophy that defines a truly great Brazilian player? This central question is what makes the final scene at MetLife Stadium in 2026 so profoundly tragic. He gave 16 years of his life, his ankles, his knees, and his mental peace to that shirt, only to watch the final curtain fall in the exact stadium where the play began. The circle had closed, not with a golden crown, but with a crown of thorns. To wear the number 10 shirt for the Brazilian national team is to willingly step into a shadow that stretches across the history of modern sport. It is not just a piece of fabric, it is a sacred vestment, an inheritance of excellence established by a man who redefined what human beings could accomplish with a leather ball at his feet. Pelé made that number immortal. He turned it into a symbol of flawless execution, artistic expression, and ultimate victory. When you inherit that shirt in Brazil, you are not expected to merely be a great football player. You are expected to be a king. You are expected to command the pitch, to perform miracles on demand, and to bring home gold. For 16 years, Neymar Jr. lived inside that colossal shadow, chasing a ghost that could never truly be caught. The statistical reality of his international career is staggering. When he stepped up to take that agonizing penalty in the 93rd minute against Norway at MetLife Stadium in 2026, he smashed the ball into the back of the net to record his 80th official goal for the Seleção. 80 goals. That number places him alone at the very top of Brazil's all-time scoring charts, eclipsing the official tally of Pelé himself. In any other country on the planet, breaking the goal-scoring record of the greatest player to ever live would secure your status as an untouchable, undisputed deity. It would mean statues in the capital, streets named after you, and an eternity of absolute reverence. But Brazil is not any other country. In the land of the 5 stars, the currency of greatness is not measured in individual statistics or friendly match goal tallies. It is minted exclusively in World Cup trophies. Ronaldo Nazário scored 62 goals, but he brought home 2 World Cups and single-handedly conquered the world in Yokohama. Romario scored 55, but he carried an entire nation on his back in 1994. Pelé won 3. This is the brutal, unforgiving paradox of Neymar's legacy. He scored more than all of them, yet he sits at the table of the immortals without a World Cup medal around his neck. The tragedy of his international career is that he was born into a generation that lacked the depth of his predecessors. When Ronaldo played, he was surrounded by Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, Roberto Carlos, and Cafu. When Pelé played, he shared the pitch with Garrincha, Tostão, Jairzinho, and Rivellino. Neymar, for the vast majority of his prime, was a solitary genius operating in a transitional, often chaotic Brazilian system. He was the entire tactical plan. If the midfield lacked creativity, Neymar had to drop deep to collect the ball. If the attack lacked penetration, Neymar had to dribble through 3 defenders to create a chance. He was the creator, the facilitator, and the finisher all at once. This systemic overdependence created an environment of impossible expectations. The Brazilian public, spoiled by decades of historical dominance, looked at Neymar and demanded that he replicate the collective success of past golden eras all by himself. They wanted the swagger of the 90s and the dominance of the 60s, and they expected an isolated kid from Santos to deliver it. As the years rolled on, the relationship between Neymar and the fans became deeply complicated, fractured by a toxic mix of extreme adoration and bitter resentment. Every tournament that did not end with a trophy was viewed as a personal failure on his part. The media fueled this fire, alternating between hyping him up as the ultimate savior and tearing him down as a symbol of an pampered, unfocused generation. They talked about his parties, his commercial deals, and his lifestyle as if those things were actively stripping away the magic from his feet. Neymar reacted to this pressure by building a fortress around himself, adopting a defiant, sometimes arrogant persona that only alienated his critics further. But underneath the expensive jewelry, the celebrity friendships, and the social media bravado, the immense weight of a nation's obsession with the hexa was slowly grinding him down. He was fighting a war on 2 fronts, battling world-class opponents on the pitch and wrestling with the crushing weight of his own country's historical expectations off it. He wanted so desperately to give them the trophy they craved, to finally silence the doubters, and to stand alongside Pelé, not just in the record books, but in the hearts of the people. But the football gods are indifferent to desire. As he grew older, the physical and emotional toll of carrying this burden began to manifest in his body. The ankles that had been kicked mercilessly by defenders across Europe and South America began to fail him. The mind that had survived a decade of intense scrutiny began to tire. Yet, he kept showing up. He kept putting on that heavy yellow shirt, running out into the arena, and trying to dance his way out of Pelé's shadow. It was a beautiful, desperate, and ultimately tragic crusade that began with a burst of adolescent joy and ended in the cold reality of a new Jersey night. To fully appreciate the heartbreak of 2026, we have to travel back to the summer that was supposed to crown him. The year is 2014. The World Cup was returning to Brazil for the first time since 1950, and the entire nation was consumed by a fever of destiny. Everywhere you looked, streets were painted in yellow and green, flags hung from skyscraper windows, and a single name echoed through the favelas and the beachside avenues: Neymar. He was just 22 years old, newly arrived at Barcelona, and possessing the kind of blinding charisma that made a whole country believe that failure was a mathematical impossibility. This was his tournament. The pressure was suffocating, the kind of psychological weight that would make veteran players buckle, but early on, Neymar seemed to float above it all. He started the campaign with an absolute explosion, scoring 2 spectacular goals in the opening match against Croatia in Sao Paulo, sending a shockwave of pure euphoria through the stands. He scored twice more against Cameroon in the group stage, carrying a structurally flawed, emotionally fragile Brazilian team through the tournament on the sheer power of his individual genius. Every time he touched the ball, you could feel a collective intake of breath across a nation of 200 million people. He was the conductor of the orchestra, the only source of pure creative light in a squad that was increasingly paralyzed by the terrifying fear of losing on home soil. Then came the quarterfinals in Fortaleza against a highly physical, aggressive Colombia side. The match was a brutal, chaotic war of attrition, filled with heavy tackles and high tension. Brazil was leading 2-1, clawing their way toward a semi-final showdown with Germany. The clock showed 85 minutes. Marcelo cleared a ball high into the warm northeastern air. Neymar dropped deep into his own half, tracking the flight of the ball, completely focused on bringing it down. He never saw the danger coming from behind. Juan Camilo Zuniga, the Colombian defender, rushed in with reckless, terrifying momentum, leaping into the air and driving his right knee directly into the small of Neymar's back. The impact was sickening. In an instant, the stadium went dead silent. Neymar collapsed onto the turf, screaming in an agony that looked entirely different from his usual theatrical falls. He was writhing in pain, clutching his lower spine, unable to move his legs. As the medical cart rushed onto the field and the stretcher carried him away toward the tunnel, an icy chill gripped the entire country. The diagnosis from a hospital in Fortaleza came like a national tragedy: a fractured third lumbar vertebra. His World Cup was over. In a single, violent second, the dream of a lifetime had been violently ripped away from the golden boy of Brazilian football. The imagery that followed remains etched into the dark corners of the country's sporting history. Neymar being airlifted to the training camp in Teresópolis, lying on a gurney with a white sheet pulled over his body, looking pale, defeated, and broken. The collective trauma was so deep that the remaining players completely lost their emotional anchor. Before the semi-final against Germany in Belo Horizonte, David Luiz and Julio Cesar stood on the pitch, tears streaming down their faces, holding Neymar's number 10 jersey high in the air during the national anthem, as if they were mourning a fallen soldier. It was a bizarre, emotionally volatile display that revealed a team completely shattered in spirit. Without their talisman, without their tactical centerpiece and emotional shield, the Seleção suffered the most humiliating, apocalyptic collapse in the history of international football, losing 7-1 to the clinical Germans. Neymar watched the slaughter from his living room, helpless, his back bound in a medical brace, watching the football empire he was supposed to rule burn to the ground. That was the first true fracture. It was the moment Neymar realized that the World Cup did not care about fairy tale endings, and that the yellow jersey could be a curse just as easily as it could be a blessing. He left 2014 not as a world champion, but as a tragic figure, a king dethroned before he could even reach his castle, leaving an open wound that would refuse to heal for the rest of his career. If the story of 2014 was a pure, unadulterated tragedy, the journey to Russia in 2018 was something entirely different, more complex, and far more damaging to the public perception of the boy who would be king. For years had passed since the catastrophe of Belo Horizonte. Neymar was no longer the innocent teenager from Santos. He was now the most expensive footballer on planet Earth, having shattered the global transfer record with his monumental €222 million move from Barcelona to Paris Saint-Germain. He had conquered the Olympics in Rio, scoring the winning penalty to secure Brazil's first ever football gold medal, and he arrived in Europe as a global megastar. But his body was already beginning to drop hints of the fragility that would haunt his later years. Just 3 months before the tournament in Russia kicked off, Neymar suffered a devastating fracture to his fifth metatarsal in his right foot during a match for Paris Saint-Germain. It was a frantic, desperate race against the clock to even get him onto the pitch. He underwent intense, grueling rehabilitation sessions, spending hours in hyperbaric chambers and physiotherapy rooms just to make sure he could lead the line for Tite's newly structured, balanced Seleção. He made it, but he arrived in Russia far from peak physical condition, his foot still tender, and his mind heavily weighed down by the immense fear of another physical breakdown. This lack of rhythm and high physical anxiety manifested on the pitch in a way that completely shifted the narrative around him. Every time a defender closed him down, every time a tackle flew in from a Swiss, Costa Rican, or Serbian player, Neymar reacted with hypersensitive desperation. He rolled across the turf, he screamed at referees, and he threw his arms up in constant frustration. To the Brazilian fans, it looked like desperation, but to the international media and global audience, it became an absolute farce. The internet exploded with memes, videos, and jokes mocking his dramatic falls, creating the global Neymar rolling phenomenon. The footballing world stopped looking at his incredible vision, his progressive passes, and his ability to unlock rigid low blocks, choosing instead to focus entirely on his theatrics. He scored a crucial, emotional stoppage time goal against Costa Rica, bursting into floods of tears on the pitch after the final whistle, showing the world the immense psychological pressure cooking inside his chest. He delivered a masterful performance against Mexico in the round of 16, scoring one and assisting another to guide Brazil into the quarterfinals. But the dark clouds were gathering. In Kazan, they ran headfirst into the golden generation of Belgium. Tite's tactical setup was caught off guard by Roberto Martinez, who deployed Kevin De Bruyne as a false nine and Romelu Lukaku on the wing, dismantling the Brazilian midfield in a devastating first half that saw Fernandinho score an own goal and De Bruyne smash a brilliant long-range strike into the back of the net. Down 2-0, Brazil fought back with absolute fury in the second half. Neymar took control of the match, driving forward, creating chances, and delivering a delicate cross for Renato Augusto to head home, breathing life back into the nation. In the dying seconds of stoppage time, with 200 million people holding their breath, Neymar collected the ball at the edge of the area and curled a magnificent, goal-bound shot toward the top corner. It looked destined to be the moment of salvation. But Thibaut Courtois, standing at a towering 2 meters tall, produced a breathtaking, fingertip save to tip the ball over the crossbar. The final whistle blew moments later. Brazil was out. Neymar did not cry on the pitch this time. He stood frozen, staring blankly into the Russian sky, completely hollowed out. He had fought his body, he had endured global humiliation, and he had come within inches of a miracle, only to be denied by a spectacular reflex save. He left Russia not with the sympathy he received in 2014, but with a reputation that had been severely damaged, viewed by many as a compromised, fragile superstar who was slowly losing his grip on the crown. By the time the winter of 2022 rolled around, the world was looking at a very different Neymar Jr. The youthful exuberance of 2014 was completely gone, replaced by the hardened, hyper-focused exterior of a veteran who knew his timeline was shrinking. The tournament in Qatar felt like his ultimate crossroad. He had openly hinted in interviews leading up to the competition that this might be his very last World Cup, stating that he did not know if he had the mental strength to endure another 4-year cycle of international pressure. He arrived in Doha in the absolute best physical condition of his adult life, having started the club season with Paris Saint-Germain in devastating form, scoring and assisting at a rate that terrified European defenses. He was lean, he was sharp, and he was completely locked in. But the curse that seemed to follow him whenever he wore the yellow shirt struck almost immediately. In the opening group stage match against Serbia, a brutal, heavy tackle from Nikola Milinkovic trapped Neymar's right ankle against the turf. He played through the pain for 11 minutes, helping initiate the goals for Richarlison, but when he finally substituted off, the images of his swollen, ballooned ankle on the bench sent shockwaves of panic across Brazil. It felt like a recurring nightmare that the nation could not wake up from. Yet, showing an incredible amount of resilience, Neymar spent days working around the clock with the medical staff, using advanced tech and intense physical therapy to return for the knockout stages. He returned with a vengeance, scoring a smooth penalty against South Korea in a 4-1 round of 16 demolition, dancing with his teammates and looking like a man possessed by destiny. Then came the quarterfinals against Croatia at the Education City Stadium. It was a tactical chess match of the highest order. The Croatian midfield trio of Luka Modric, Marcelo Brozovic, and Mateo Kovacic completely suffocated the game, killing the rhythm and frustrating the Brazilian attackers for 90 grueling minutes. The match pushed into extra time, the tension in the air so thick it was hard to breathe. Then, in the 105th minute, Neymar decided to write his own history. He picked up the ball deep in the attacking third, exchanged a lightning-fast, intricate 1-2 pass with Rodrigo, drove forward, played another telepathic 1-2 with Lucas Paqueta, burst through the center of the stubborn Croatian defense, rounded the towering goalkeeper Dominik Livakovic, and smashed the ball into the roof of the net from a tight angle. It was an absolute work of art, a goal of pure Samba genius that drew him level with Pele's official goal-scoring record. The stadium exploded into a wall of yellow noise. Millions of people across Brazil were crying, hugging, and screaming. It was supposed to be the definitive moment of his legacy, the legendary goal that would be replayed for the next 50 years as the strike that sent Brazil to the semi-finals. But football can be a deeply sadistic game. With just 4 minutes left on the clock in the second half of extra time, a catastrophic tactical lapse left the Brazilian defense completely exposed on a counterattack. Bruno Petkovic swept a shot that deflected off Marquinhos and sailed past a diving Alisson Becker. 1-1. The match went to a brutal penalty shootout. Neymar, designated as the fifth penalty taker, the savior meant to score the winning shot, never even got to step up to the spot. Rodrigo missed, Marquinhos hit the post, and the shootout was over before it reached him. The image of Neymar standing alone in the center circle, his face blank with disbelief as the Croatians sprinted past him to celebrate, remains one of the most heartbreaking sights in Brazilian sports history. He collapsed to the ground, crying inconsolably, comforted only by young Antony and Dani Alves. He had delivered masterpiece, he had touched the sky, and in a matter of minutes, it had all turned to ash. The aftermath of Qatar was a dark, silent void. Neymar isolated himself, admitting that the defeat to Croatia had broken him psychologically, leaving a wound far deeper than the physical fracture of 2014. For months, the footballing world wondered if he would ever put on the yellow shirt again. The years that followed between that heartbreaking night in Doha and the expansion of the World Cup in 2026 were the most turbulent, chaotic, and physically punishing of his entire life. The narrative shifted away from European dominance as Neymar made the monumental, highly controversial decision to leave Paris Saint-Germain and fly to the Middle East, signing an astronomical contract with Al Hilal. Many pundits and fans openly declared that this was the definitive end of his elite career, a golden retirement for a man who had grown tired of the relentless demands of European football. But the football gods were not done testing his resolve. Shortly after arriving in Saudi Arabia, disaster struck in its most cruel form. During an international match against Uruguay in Montevideo, Neymar twisted his knee and collapsed in visible agony. The medical report was devastating, a complete rupture of the anterior cruciate ligament and meniscus in his left knee. It was an injury that required major surgery and a brutal, soul-destroying rehabilitation process that sidelined him for nearly a year. The internet was flooded with videos of him screaming in pure agony in physiotherapy rooms, crying as trainers forced his stiff, damaged leg to bend. It was a gruesome reminder of the human cost behind the superstar exterior. As the 2026 World Cup approached, Brazil was undergoing a massive tactical transformation under the guidance of the legendary Italian manager Carlo Ancelotti. Ancelotti was building a hyper-dynamic, high-pressing, transitional side built around the terrifying speed and youth of Vinicius Jr., Rodrigo, and the young prodigy, Endrick. The team was evolving, becoming less dependent on a single creative axis, which led to fierce debates across Brazilian television networks. Did this new, modern Brazil even need Neymar anymore? Was his slow, calculated style of play a hindrance to the lightning, fast transitions Ancelotti demanded? To make matters worse, just as he was regaining fitness, a severe calf injury sidelined him during the final stretch of the club season. It became a frantic, desperate race against time to see if his body could handle the intensity of an international tournament. Ancelotti, recognizing the immense value of veteran leadership and unmatched technical brilliance, made the executive decision to include Neymar in his final 26-man squad for the United States, Canada, and Mexico expansion. But everyone knew he was entering the tournament as a warrior in shards, a beautifully compromised genius held together by medical tape, sheer willpower, and an obsessive, desperate hunger for redemption. Before we look at how this fragile kingdom completely dissolved on the pitches of North America, take a brief moment right now to subscribe to the Football Archive, smash that like button, and leave a comment below. I want to hear from you. Do you think Carlo Ancelotti made a mistake by bringing an unfit Neymar to the 2026 World Cup? Or is a 50% fit Neymar still better than any other option Brazil had? Tell me what city or country you are watching this video from right now, because your support keeps this archive alive and growing every single day. Let us step onto the pitch for the final act. The opening ceremonies of the 2026 World Cup across North America signaled the dawn of a completely new era. But for Neymar Jr., it was a harsh, grounding lesson in the relentless march of time. When the Selecao took the pitch for their opening group stage matches, the starting lineup looked profoundly different from the teams of the past decade. The lightning-fast, high-pressing, vertical system designed by Carlo Ancelotti had no room for a stationary playmaker. Vinicius Jr. held the left wing with an iron grip, showing the world the blazing speed and maturity he had polished at Real Madrid. On the right, Rodrigo operated with lethal intelligence, while young Endrick occupied the center, terrifying physical defenders with his raw power and explosive movement. For the first time in his 16-year international career, Neymar found himself walking toward the dugout, not to lead the team out as the captain, but to sit on the bench. He was wearing a neon training bib, his ankles wrapped tightly in protective tape, watching a new generation of boys play the game at a pace his battered body could no longer match. It was a bizarre, jarring sight for football fans across the globe. The man who had been the undisputed sun around which the entire solar system of Brazilian football revolved was now a luxury substitute, a tactical wild card to be used only in moments of absolute necessity. To his immense credit, Neymar handled this structural shift with a level of maturity that surprised many of his harshest critics. There were no public tantrums, no toxic media leaks, and no signs of resentment. Instead, cameras caught him constantly talking to Vinicius Jr. on the touchline, whispering tactical advice into the ear of Endrick, and actively celebrating every goal from the technical area like a dedicated fan. He had accepted his reality. He knew he could no longer carry the physical burden of 90 grueling minutes of international football, but he believed with every fiber of his being that he still possessed the magic needed to turn a match around in a single, brilliant moment. That opportunity arrived in the final group stage match against Scotland. With the game locked in a tense, frustrating stalemate, and the Brazilian attack struggling to break down a rigid, deeply embedded defensive block, Ancelotti turned to his bench and pointed at the number 10. The moment Neymar stepped up to the fourth official's board, the stadium erupted into a deafening, earth-shaking roar that proved his myth was still very much alive. He stepped onto the pitch with a calm, measured stride, moving through the spaces with the quiet confidence of an old master craftsman. He did not run aimlessly. He did not chase defenders. Instead, he manipulated the space around him. Within 10 minutes of his introduction, he picked up a loose ball between the lines, executed a breathtaking, no-look disguised pass that sliced through 4 Scottish defenders and put Rodrigo completely clean through on goal to break the deadlock. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated class, a stark reminder to the world that while his pace had faded, his footballing brain remained entirely untouched by time. Brazil marched into the knockout stages with a sense of quiet optimism, believing that this unique blend of youthful, chaotic energy and Neymar's veteran wisdom was the perfect formula to finally conquer the world. But the knockout rounds are an unforgiving crucible, and a dark Scandinavian cloud was already gathering on the horizon, waiting to test the resolve of this changing Brazilian guard. The round of 16 brought the Brazilian national team back to the northeastern coast of the United States, pulling them directly into the colossal bowl of MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. The atmospheric tension surrounding the venue was almost tangible, wrapped in a thick layer of historical significance that felt heavy to anyone who knew the deep roots of Neymar's international story. This was the arena where the myth had been officially born 16 years prior, and now it was playing host to a high-stakes, direct elimination clash against a highly disciplined, physically imposing Norway side. The Norwegians, led by the tactical organization of their coaching staff, had developed into the ultimate tournament dark horse, built specifically to frustrate elite opposition and punish them with clinical efficiency. But the true headline of the night was the presence of a single individual, a modern footballing executioner, who was tearing through international defenses with a terrifying level of ease. Erling Haaland stood at the absolute peak of his formidable powers, a towering, relentless athletic marvel who represented the exact opposite of the traditional, artistic Brazilian style of play. While Brazil looked to construct intricate, rhythmic patterns on the turf, Haaland and the Norwegians were looking to wage a war of pure physical power, direct transitions, and aerial dominance. Carlo Ancelotti started the match with his young, blazing front line, hoping that the sheer velocity of Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo could pull the compact Norwegian defensive block out of position. But from the very first whistle, the match refused to follow the expected Brazilian script. The Norwegian midfield operated like a mechanical wall, closing down spaces, throwing heavy but perfectly timed tackles, and completely suffocating the creative passing lanes that the young Seleção stars relied upon. Every time Brazil attempted to build momentum, they were met with a wall of red shirts, forcing them into wide, harmless areas of the pitch. Then, as the first half drew toward its conclusion, the executioner delivered his first devastating blow. A swift, direct counterattack caught the Brazilian backline slightly unbalanced. A curling, pinpoint cross was delivered into the heart of the penalty box, and Haaland, using his immense physical strength to completely overpower his marker, rose high into the New Jersey night air to power a spectacular header past a diving Alisson Becker. 1-0. The stadium went into a state of collective shock, the large contingent of Brazilian fans suddenly silenced by the raw efficiency of the strike. In the second half, Ancelotti pushed his lines forward, throwing more bodies into the attacking third, but the tactical desperation left them fatally exposed. In the 78th minute, history repeated itself in the most brutal fashion. Another rapid breakout from the back allowed Norway to slice through the frantic Brazilian midfield, and Haaland was found entirely unmarked at the edge of the area, smashing a lethal, low drive into the bottom corner of the net. 2-0. The dream of the sixth star was rapidly slipping away into the darkness, leaving a young, inexperienced Brazilian squad looking entirely panicked on the pitch. From the dugout, Neymar watched the unfolding disaster with an expression of pure, unadulterated agony, knowing that his final international campaign was on the absolute brink of total extinction. He began stripping off his training jacket, his face hardened by a desperate, furious resolve as he prepared to step onto the battlefield for one final, impossible rescue mission. The referee's final whistle blew like an absolute hammer blow to the collective chest of an entire nation. The sound was sharp, definitive, and utterly merciless, echoing off the high steel beams of MetLife Stadium and signaling the official death of a golden dream. It was over. Norway 2, Brazil 1. In an instant, the stadium fractured into two completely different worlds. On one side of the pitch, Erling Haaland and the Norwegian players were sprinting toward their fans, screaming in pure, unadulterated ecstasy, celebrating one of the greatest, most historic victories their country had ever achieved on a football pitch. But on the other side, the world was witnessing a scene of profound, apocalyptic sorrow. The young stars of the new Brazilian generation collapsed to the turf in total disbelief, buried underneath the sudden, crushing weight of their very first major international failure. Vinicius Jr. covered his face with his jersey, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, while Rodrigo stared blankly into the cold New Jersey night sky, completely paralyzed by the reality of the elimination. But the cameras, as they always had for the past 16 years, bypassed the youth to find the central figure of the entire drama. Neymar Jr. stood entirely still for a fraction of a second, his hands resting heavily on his hips, his eyes fixed on the giant scoreboard that confirmed the end of his journey. Then, slowly, as if his legs could no longer support the immense psychological weight of the moment, he sank down onto his knees in the center circle. He buried his face deep into his gloved hands, his forehead resting against the cool, damp grass of the pitch, and he began to cry. These were not the frantic, theatrical tears of his youth in Russia, nor were they the shock-induced tears of 2014 or the immediate, sharp heartbreak of Qatar. These were the tears of absolute finality, the weeping of a man who knew with absolute certainty that he had reached the absolute end of his road, and that he would never, ever get another opportunity to fix what had been broken. His teammates recognized the historical gravity of the scene, slowly walked over to him, attempting to lift him back to his feet. Eder Militao tried to pull his arm. Marquinhos bent down to whisper words of comfort into his ear, but Neymar remained completely inconsolable, trapped inside his own private fortress of sorrow. He had sacrificed his ankles, he had endured systemic mockery, he had flown across the planet, and he had pushed his compromised, broken body to its absolute limits just to stand on this field, only to watch the ultimate prize vanish into thin air once again. The poetry of the moment was deeply cruel. The stadium that had given him his very first moment of international joy as an 18-year-old boy in 2010 was now the exact place where his ultimate footballing dream was being buried forever. The circle was complete, but it had ended in a total blackout. Up in the press boxes, global sports journalists were already typing out their frantic, breaking headlines, their keyboards clicking away to analyze the downfall of the Brazilian giants. But down on the grass, away from the tactical breakdowns and the immediate post-match criticism, it was a deeply human tragedy. The last great samba artist of his generation was sitting in the middle of a cold American stadium, completely surrounded by the ruins of an empire he was destined to build but could never quite finish. Sugestão de imagem, high-definition, slow-motion footage of Neymar sitting completely alone on his knees in the center circle of MetLife Stadium, burying his face in his hands while Norwegian players celebrate in the blurred background. The walk from the center circle of MetLife Stadium to the underbelly of the arena felt like a slow, agonizing march toward a definitive execution. Neymar Jr. walked with a heavy, dragging stride, his arms wrapped around his torso as if trying to hold himself together, ignoring the cameras that hung over the metal railings to capture every single tear rolling down his face. The tunnel was cold, bright, and sterile, a stark contrast to the humid, emotional chaos of the pitch outside. As he turned the corner and entered the official post-match mixed zone, the atmosphere changed instantly. It was a literal wall of human pressure. Hundreds of sports journalists from Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Paris, Madrid, and London were packed tightly behind metal barriers, their arms extended, holding out a forest of microphones, dictaphones, and cell phones, all desperately competing for a single quote. The flashing lights from the television cameras reflected off Neymar's red, swollen eyes, creating a dizzying, chaotic environment. In the past, during moments of high-profile defeats, Neymar would often slide past the press with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, surrounded by security guards, refusing to engage with the critics who waited to tear him apart. But tonight was different. He stopped. He walked directly toward the largest cluster of microphones, leaning his forearms against the cold metal barrier, looking entirely drained of his life force. The room went completely silent, the kind of heavy, breathless quiet that occurs right before a historic announcement. When he spoke, his voice was not filled with the defiance or anger that had characterized so much of his younger years. It was quiet, soft, and completely honest. "I tried," he began, his voice cracking slightly as he paused to swallow his emotion. "I tried with everything I had. I sacrificed my health, my family time, and my peace to give this country the trophy it deserves. But now it is over. My body hurts, my head hurts, and I have nothing left to give to this shirt. I started my history here in this stadium in 2010, and it is only right that I close it here in 2026. I am stepping away from the Selecao forever." The words fell like lead weights into the room. Journalists looked at each other in shock, scribbling furiously into their notebooks as the realization washed over the football world. It was official. The greatest goal scorer in the history of Brazilian football was retiring from international duty at 34 years old, finishing his story without the golden crown he had chased across 4 different continents. Neymar explained that the decision was not a reactive impulse born from the pain of losing to Norway, but a calculated conclusion he had reached after months of wrestling with his own physical deterioration. He spoke about the endless cycle of knee surgeries, the chronic ankle instability, and the psychological exhaustion of living under a microscope for nearly 2 decades. He explicitly passed the torch to Vinicius Jr., Rodrigo, and Endrick, telling the press that the future of the nation belonged to them now, and that they needed to be protected from the same crushing weight that had defined his own career. He thanked the fans who had loved him unconditionally, and he even thanked the critics who had pushed him to be better. It was a beautiful, dignified, and incredibly mature press conference that completely shattered the stereotype of the pampered, self-absorbed superstar. He stood there for 10 minutes, answering questions with absolute transparency, laying his soul bare before the world, before finally stepping away from the microphone, turning his back on the media scrum, and disappearing into the private dressing room to take off the yellow shirt for the final time. The yellow number 10 jersey now hangs completely motionless inside a silent, empty dressing room at MetLife Stadium. The lights have been turned off, the crowds have cleared out into the New Jersey night, and the long, chaotic, beautiful saga of Neymar Jr.'s international career has officially reached its final chapter. He leaves the international arena, not wrapped in the golden confetti of a World Cup triumph, but wrapped in something far more complex, a legacy defined by an incredible paradox of unparalleled individual statistical dominance and profound collective heartbreak. With 80 official goals, he sits alone at the absolute peak of Brazil's scoring history, a monumental milestone that cements his name alongside the greatest titans to ever play the sport. Yet the absence of that elusive sixth World Cup star will forever dominate the debates in the bars of Rio, the television studios of Sao Paulo, and the football academies across the globe. History will judge him fiercely, as it always does with geniuses who refuse to conform to traditional expectations, but true students of the beautiful game will remember the sheer joy he brought to the pitch. He was the last true link to the golden era of Joga Bonito, a street footballer who brought the irreverence, the cheekiness, and the artistic flair of the favelas to the grandest stages of modern, highly tactical European systems. He played with a target on his back for 16 years, absorbing brutal physical punishment from defenders who could not handle his speed of thought, while simultaneously absorbing the impossible psychological expectations of an entire nation obsessed with historical excellence. Legends of the sport from Thierry Henry to Zlatan Ibrahimovic immediately took to social media to pay tribute to his international retirement, reminding the world that trophies are not the sole metric of a player's impact on human culture. Neymar did not just score goals, he changed the way an entire generation watched, emulated, and fell in love with football. As we close the archive on this modern king, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, leave a definitive like on this video, and drop your final thought in the comments below. Now that the dust has settled on 2026, how will you choose to remember Neymar Jr.? Will you remember him as the tragic hero who fell short of the ultimate prize, or as the unstoppable Samba magician who broke records and played with pure magic in his boots? Let me know your honest thoughts, and tell me where you are watching this video from, because your incredible engagement is what keeps the football archive alive, growing, and documenting the greatest stories in sporting history. The king has stepped off the pitch, the music has faded, but the echoes of his dribbles will live on forever. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next archive.